In May 2024, the family of Natalie Mariana López endured a harrowing ordeal that lasted 3 days. The 27-year-old woman had vanished without a trace, leaving her parents deeply bewildered and anguished. As the days passed, no piece of information seemed to fit or offer a coherent explanation for her disappearance. All they knew was that she had left her home, abandoning her husband and their 1-year-old daughter. Around midday, while the mystery still loomed large, Natalie's mother invited her son-in-law over for lunch at her home in Jocotitlán, in the state of Mexico, something she did almost daily. Unable to contain her anxiety, she asked him once again the question that haunted her: "What do you think happened to her?" Julio Cesar's only response was that he firmly believed Natalie had traveled to Mexico City, possibly to visit an aunt. However, the story he told failed to convince her mother. It was completely out of character for Natalie to abandon her family, especially her young child. Something far more troubling had to be behind her disappearance, and it wouldn't take long to uncover it. After officially reporting Natalie's disappearance, police officers arrived at the home she shared with Julio Cesar to conduct a search and verify his account. What they discovered behind the couple's bed was nothing short of horrifying. The case of Natalie Mariana López Calderón, although profoundly disturbing, has received relatively little media attention, perhaps due to the overwhelming number of femicides that occur daily in Mexico. According to a 2024 report by the National Information Center, there were 797 suspected femicides recorded in the country that year, an average of more than 2 per day, and experts fear the actual number could be even higher, as many cases likely go unreported. Against this grim backdrop, Natalie's case briefly entered and then faded from the public agenda. But it was never forgotten. Her family, friends, and neighbors continue to demand justice in her name. Based on the information available, we can begin to reconstruct what her life was like before it came to such a tragic end. Natalie lived with her partner and their young daughter in a house located in Concepción Caro, within the municipality of Jocotitlán in the state of Mexico. On the surface, they appeared to be a typical family. However, in the neighborhood, it was an open secret that all was not well in that household. Those close to the couple knew that their relationship was far from ideal. Perhaps it had never been truly healthy, but it was clear that the final weeks had been especially tumultuous for the small family. Heated arguments and shouting matches had become commonplace. Although Natalie's friends were unaware that she was experiencing domestic violence, they had begun to notice increasingly troubling behavior from her partner. Over time, Cesar had grown more possessive and jealous. Contrary to what Natalie had hoped, the arrival of their baby daughter only heightened the tension. The constant demands of caring for an infant further strained the relationship. Whenever Natalie asked Cesar to contribute in any way to their daily responsibilities, particularly financial ones, he responded with hostility and aggression. Despite these red flags, there had been no formal reports of domestic abuse, and Cesar's relationship with Natalie's parents appeared cordial and even frequent. The turmoil remained hidden behind closed doors, until one day it escalated to a tragic level. According to several neighbors, on May 17th, the arguments between the couple lasted throughout the entire day. Shouting and banging sounds could be heard repeatedly, and by nightfall, those living nearby feared the worst, yet no one contacted the police. Following Natalie's disappearance, Cesar claimed that during the night of May 17th, she had grown tired of the constant fighting. According to him, she told him she was fed up with everything, and without saying more, she simply left, abandoning both him and their young daughter. He added that she had gone out with only the clothes she was wearing, taking no belongings, not even her cell phone. She didn't tell him where she was going, but for reasons he never explained clearly, Cesar assumed she had headed to Mexico City to visit an aunt, a claim he repeated consistently until his entire narrative began to collapse. When Natalie's family noticed her absence the following day, Cesar's explanation immediately struck them as suspicious, yet they had no concrete evidence to disprove his story. It was more of an instinct, a deeply unsettling feeling. Natalie was a responsible woman and, more importantly, a devoted mother. It was utterly unthinkable that she would vanish without warning or abandon her daughter without a word. Adding to their concern, the family was unable to contact her, as her cell phone had been left behind in the house. Still, Cesar insisted that everything was fine. Despite wanting to believe him, Natalie's family reported her disappearance to the authorities immediately, hoping the police would assist in locating her. However, official action was delayed by more than 48 hours, the standard waiting period many government agencies observe before launching a search for an adult believed to have left home voluntarily. What the family didn't yet know was that the reality of the situation was far more sinister, and that this lost time would only deepen their anguish. Over the next 3 days, Natalie's parents were struck by Cesar's unnerving composure. He behaved as though nothing unusual had happened. He remained adamant in his belief, and tried to persuade them as well, that Natalie was safe and had simply chosen to take time away for herself. He continued his daily routine, even visiting his in-laws for lunch, and bringing his daughter along, as if everything were perfectly normal. In stark contrast, Natalie's parents were overwhelmed with anxiety and unable to sleep. No explanation offered by their son-in-law could ease their growing fear. Something simply didn't add up. But the detail that truly intensified their suspicions was what they heard from the neighbors. When Natalie's parents visited her neighborhood to investigate what had happened that night, nearby residents were unambiguous in their accounts. The couple had engaged in a fierce and prolonged argument on May 17th, an altercation that lasted throughout the day and well into the night. Though Cesar claimed it was merely a routine disagreement, numerous neighbors contradicted that version and added a chilling detail. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, the shouting abruptly stopped. No one reported seeing Natalie leave the house as her husband claimed, and that absence of evidence made his story all the more suspicious. Natalie's family was desperate for the police to begin the search immediately, but the first 3 days passed without any meaningful progress. Cesar's calm demeanor and consistent story seemed to momentarily quell any initial doubts, even though neighbors had already provided a conflicting account of events. What no one realized at the time was that Cesar was concealing a horrifying secret. Inside the home, he was quietly working to hide something he was determined to keep buried at all costs. Natalie's family had no idea that the truth behind her disappearance was about to be revealed in the most terrifying way imaginable. During the days that Natalie remained missing, her photo and case details circulated through media outlets in hopes that someone might recognize her or offer information. There remained a lingering hope that Natalie might be wandering the streets or staying at her aunt's home, and that someone could recognize her and bring much-needed relief to her parents. She was described as a woman measuring 1.55 meters in height, with an athletic build, black hair, and several distinctive features that could aid in her identification. Among them were surgical scars, one from an appendectomy and another from the cesarean section she had undergone just over a year earlier, after becoming a mother. She also had a few tattoos, a heart on her neck near the throat, and a rose at the center of her chest. In one widely shared photograph, she is shown smiling broadly, turned slightly to the side with her tattoos visible. This urgent missing persons bulletin was broadcast repeatedly by media outlets, many of which had, sadly, become accustomed to the frequent disappearance of women across Mexico, a country grappling with an alarming rate of femicide. Such a grim backdrop inevitably led to fears of the worst possible outcome. That fear also haunted Natalie's parents. They continued voicing their doubts to the Office of the Attorney General for the state of Mexico, insisting that Julio Cesar's account be examined in detail. They no longer believed a word of what he said and grew increasingly convinced that he was hiding something. At last, on May 20th, 3 days after Natalie was reported missing, the authorities arrived at her home with a search warrant to collect evidence from the last known place she was seen alive and to compare those findings with Julio Cesar's version of events. Confident that nothing incriminating would be found, he allowed investigators to enter the residence without resistance. That day, Natalie's father was particularly anxious. It was his birthday, and all he wanted was to uncover the truth about his daughter's whereabouts and confirm that she was alive and unharmed somewhere. But there would be no need for prolonged searching to find the reality. It soon became clear that Julio Cesar had been lying, and that Natalie was not safe. The harrowing truth awaited investigators right beside the couple's bed. Upon entering the master bedroom, officers immediately noticed a suspicious block of concrete. Its fresh appearance, evident from the color and texture, suggested it had been constructed recently. As investigators drew closer, a horrifying sight emerged. A pair of feet could be seen protruding from behind the crude concrete wall. From that moment on, events unfolded rapidly. Officers broke through the cement block and uncovered an entire human body. Only 3 days had passed since Natalie's disappearance, making it relatively easy for police to identify the victim. Her tattoos confirmed what everyone feared: the body belonged to Natalie. This revelation could only mean one thing: Julio Cesar had lied. As her family had suspected from the beginning, he was directly involved in her disappearance. What had started as a missing persons case had now become a full-fledged femicide investigation. While forensic tests were still pending, it was evident that Natalie had been murdered on the same day she vanished, inside her own home, and that the perpetrator had made a crude attempt to hide her body. The news sent shockwaves across the country. How could Julio Cesar have slept in the same room for 3 nights with his wife's corpse beside him? Had he murdered in front of their infant daughter? Why had none of the neighbors alerted the authorities on the day they heard hours of shouting and insults? Shortly after the discovery of her body, forensic analysis confirmed that Natalie had been strangled. Julio Cesar was immediately arrested. Suddenly, his account of the early morning hours of May 17th unraveled. The argument had escalated to a point where he grabbed his wife by the neck and strangled her to death. This occurred around 3 a.m., precisely the time when neighbors recalled the shouting stopping abruptly. That was the moment Julio Cesar ended Natalie's life and began executing his plan to conceal the crime. At first glance, it appeared to be a straightforward case. With the body discovered in his bedroom, there was little doubt about his guilt. Yet for the Lopez family, the road ahead would be long, painful, and filled with legal obstacles. Natalie's family had already been disillusioned by the sluggish start to the investigation, but their frustration would only intensify over time, far beyond anything they had imagined possible. 5 months after the crime, Natalie Mariana López's name resurfaced in national media when her family publicly protested the lack of tangible progress in the case. What most outraged Natalie's family was that despite the discovery of her body, authorities were still investigating Julio Cesar for disappearance, not murder. The family quickly demanded that the case be reclassified as femicide and that the sole suspect be officially investigated for the killing of the young woman. Otherwise, legal proceedings would continue to stall, prolonging the suffering of Natalie's loved ones. Speaking before cameras, Natalie's mother expressed particular anguish over the fact that Cesar had pretended not to know anything about her daughter's disappearance and had even dared to join them for meals just hours after taking her life. Convinced they were dealing with a psychopath, Natalie's parents urged the justice system to expedite the case and ensure that no privileges were extended to Julio Cesar. They were especially concerned about this possibility, having learned in the following months that the accused had relatives with ties to powerful political figures in Mexico. The family feared that such connections could allow the crime to go unpunished. Specifically, it came to light that 2 of Cesar's uncles were practicing attorneys, and another held a position within the ministry in Atlacomulco. Natalie's family suspects these individuals may attempt to use their influence to shield Cesar from a certain conviction and possibly bury the case in obscurity so that the public would forget and justice would never be served. Although Natalie's name briefly resurfaced in the headlines 5 months after the crime, public discussion of her case quickly faded again. The last media reports date back to November 2024. As of the recording of this video in March 2025, no new developments have been made public. Mexico remains one of the countries most plagued by gender-based violence, particularly femicide, which continues to dominate national headlines year after year. In 2024, a total of 797 femicides were reported, including Natalie's case. Although this marks a slight decrease from the 833 cases documented in 2023, the numbers remain deeply alarming. This is according to the National Information Center, which also provided a detailed breakdown of the areas with the highest femicide rates in Mexico. At the state level, the municipalities topping this grim ranking are Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua with 25 cases, Tijuana, Baja California with 17, Iztapalapa, and Mexico City, both with 14. This crisis is not limited to Mexico. According to United Nations data, an estimated 140 women and girls are killed every day around the world, most often at the hands of a partner or close family member. A woman is murdered every 10 minutes worldwide. In 60% of these cases, the perpetrator is an intimate partner or a family member. This grim reality brings us back to the case of Natalie López, an all too painful example of this global crisis. What makes Natalie's story even more heartbreaking is the presence of another innocent victim, her young daughter. The little girl is currently in the care of her maternal relatives, who have expressed how difficult the situation has been for them to navigate. They constantly wonder how they'll eventually explain to her what happened to her parents, though she is not yet 3 years old. The time will come when she begins asking questions, trying to make sense of her story and identity, piecing together a past marked by profound loss. Natalie's mother, speaking publicly, has appeared emotionally devastated. One day, she will have to tell her granddaughter that her mother was murdered while she was still a baby, and that her father's absence is because he is the alleged killer. Should the López family's worst fears come true, if Julio César never faces justice, what will become of the child? Will she be forced to re-establish contact with the man accused of murdering her mother? Natalie's parents prefer not even to imagine such a scenario. Instead, they hold on to the hope that justice will prevail, and that Julio César will spend the rest of his life behind bars. I bid you farewell with a heartfelt embrace. If you haven't yet subscribed, I warmly invite you to do so and become part of this growing community. This has been Tale Tracks until our next broadcast.